Sometimes the smallest moments reveal the biggest truths. A quiet boy, clutching his sketchbook, boarded a flight with his mother, just another passenger, just another seat. But, in the blink of an eye, that ordinary moment turned into a test of dignity. When a wealthy passenger in the flight crew insisted he give up his first-class seat, one his family had rightfully paid for, this 12-year-old was faced with a choice. Should he move to avoid trouble? Or should he stay and risk standing alone against power and prejudice? Now, imagine it was your child in that seat. Would you tell them to step aside for the sake of peace, or encourage them to hold their ground, even when the world demanded otherwise? This is not just a story about flying. It is about every moment in life when we are told we are less than, and the courage it takes to say, "No, I belong. Stay with us," as we uncover how one boy's quiet defiance and one father's powerful voice turned a single flight into a movement. If this story moves you, please like, share, and subscribe, because what happens next will stay with you forever. The first light of morning spilled across the wide glass windows of Dallas International Airport. The air was full of hurried footsteps, rolling suitcases, and the faint aroma of strong coffee drifting from a kiosk near the gate. Amid the noise, a boy held his ticket like it was something sacred. His name was Jordan Miles, 12 years old, slight in build, his dark eyes alert behind thin-rimmed glasses. He clutched a sketchbook in his free hand, filled with pencil drawings of airplanes, superheroes, and city skylines. For him, this was no ordinary morning. This was the day he would sit in a first-class seat for the very first time. Beside him walked his mother, Angela Miles, her nurse's uniform tucked neatly beneath a warm cardigan. Her voice was calm, but her hand rested on Jordan's shoulder in a protective way only mothers know. She was used to long hospital shifts, but today she had traded the fluorescent lights of the clinic for this journey, a trip to New York where her husband was already waiting. Her husband, Caleb Miles, was more than just a father. He was the CEO of Aerogrid Systems, a company whose technology quietly powered the backbone of flight operations across dozens of airports. But to Jordan, he was simply Dad, the man who built Lego towers with him late at night and taught him that dignity was something you never gave away, no matter the pressure. Angela bent down slightly as they approached the gate. "Remember what I told you?" she said softly, her eyes locking with his. Jordan nodded. "My dignity is mine to keep. That's right." She squeezed his shoulder gently. "Don't let anyone take it from you." They reached gate 22B. The sign above announced Flight 604 to New York, boarding first-class passengers. A line was forming. Mostly business travelers in pressed suits, scrolling on phones, their expressions detached. Jordan glanced down at his ticket again. Seat 2A, and felt a swell of pride. It wasn't just a seat, it was a symbol. Growing up, Jordan had often overheard stories of his father's boyhood. Caleb had once been denied boarding as a teenager because a gate agent assumed a black boy couldn't possibly hold a legitimate ticket. That story had stayed with Jordan like a scar that wasn't his, passed down through memory. Today felt different. Today, Jordan believed, was the day he would belong. When they reached the boarding gate, the attendant scanned their tickets. A cheerful beep confirmed their seats. Jordan's heart fluttered. They walked down the jet bridge together, the echo of footsteps amplifying the anticipation. Inside the cabin, the air smelled faintly of leather seats and fresh coffee. A soft jazz tune played overhead. Rows of wide, cream-colored seats curved gracefully along the windows. Jordan found his spot, seat 2A, right by the window. He slid into it carefully, as though it might vanish if he moved too quickly. His legs dangled slightly above the floor. He set his sketchbook on the tray, then touched the seatbelt buckle with quiet reverence. Angela leaned over, brushing his curls back from his forehead. Comfy enough, Jordan grinned. It's like sitting in the captain's chair of the Enterprise. Angela laughed quietly, but there was a softness in her eyes. Well, Captain, enjoy every second. You've earned it. Jordan pressed his face to the window. Outside, a line of luggage carts trundled across the tarmac. A fuel truck rolled slowly by. He began sketching quickly the wing, the workers, the long stretch of sky just beginning to glow. For a moment, everything was perfect, but perfection has a way of drawing shadows. A man paused near Jordan's row, his eyes narrowing. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his silver hair trimmed with precision. The kind of man whose suit seemed to announce power before he even spoke. His name, though Jordan didn't know it yet, was Charles Whitman. Charles looked down at the boy in seat 2A, then at Angela arranging her bag in the overhead bin. His lips pressed into a thin line. A child, he muttered under his breath, loud enough for Jordan to hear. In this section, Jordan felt his stomach twist. He lowered his pencil, the sketch unfinished. He remembered his mother's words, but something cold flickered in his chest. Angela straightened, sensing the man's stare. Her expression remained calm, but her body shifted slightly closer to her son. For now, no one said more. Charles walked further down the aisle, but not before glancing back once, as if already plotting. Jordan returned to his sketchbook, but his hand trembled against the page. He told himself to focus. He was in Sat 2A. It was his. It was real. And yet, deep down, he felt the beginning of something heavy, pressing in an invisible tension that made even the soft leather beneath him feel uncertain. What Jordan didn't know was that this flight, and this very seat, would soon ignite a confrontation that would spread far beyond the cabin walls. A battle not just over space, but over dignity, justice, and the right of a child to simply belong. The cabin door was still open. Passengers still filing in when Jordan felt the shift in the air. It wasn't just the hum of people storing bags or the shuffle of footsteps along the carpeted aisle. It was the way eyes seemed to linger on him, questioning, as though the sight of a young black boy in first class did not quite belong to the story they carried in their minds. Jordan tried to drown it out. He adjusted the armrest, flipped through the glossy magazine in the seat pocket, even doodled another sketch on the corner of a page. But then, like a shadow returning, the tall man in the silver hair came back into view. Charles Whitman had been reassigned, or so he claimed. His voice, clipped and self-assured, carried to the row where Jordan sat. "There's been a mistake," Charles said firmly to the nearest attendant. "That seat is mine. 2A." The flight attendant, a young woman with a neat bun and practiced smile, checked her tablet. "Sir, I have you in 4C. Charles's jaw tightened. He glanced again at Jordan, who sat upright now, gripping his sketchbook as if it were armor. "Impossible," Charles replied. "I'm a Platinum Elite member. I always sit in the first row. 2A is my seat. I need it now." Angela Miles, standing to help Jordan adjust his carry-on under the seat, turned calmly toward the man, Her tone was measured but firm. "Sir, my son has a confirmed boarding pass for 2A. We checked in at the gate. There's no mistake." Charles gave a dry laugh, the kind that cut more than it amused. "With all respect, ma'am, this section is reserved for certain travelers. It's not," he paused deliberately, "common practice to assign premium seats to unaccompanied minors." Jordan's face flushed hot. He wanted to disappear into the leather seat. But another part of him bristled. He remembered his father's words. Dignity is something you never give away. Still, at 12 years old, the weight of standing firm against a grown man in a tailored suit was crushing. The attendant shifted uncomfortably. She leaned down to Angela, whispering, "Let me check with the supervisor." Jordan heard every word. His chest tightened. Why did they need to check? His boarding pass was right there. Moments later, another attendant arrived, older, with a sharp gaze that flickered from Charles to Jordan. Her name tag read Diane Keller, and her voice carried the kind of authority meant to end debates before they began. "What's the issue here?" Diane asked. Charles wasted no time. "The issue is that my seat has been taken 2A, and somehow a child has been placed there. This is absurd." Diane turned to Angela, then to Jordan. "Ma'am, do you have his boarding pass?" Angela produced it without hesitation. Diane examined it, her eyes narrowing slightly. "It does say 2A," she admitted, but then she lowered her voice, adding, "We do sometimes move passengers for operational needs. Perhaps the boy could be accommodated in business class or economy for today." Angela's spine straightened. Her voice did not rise, but it sharpened. "No, he will not be moved. We paid for this seat. He has every right to sit here." Passengers nearby had begun to notice. A man across the aisle raised his brows. A woman, 2 rows back, whispered something to her companion. Jordan felt the stares burrowing into him, each one asking silently the same question: did he belong here? Charles pressed the advantage. "Listen, I don't want to cause a scene, but I've earned this seat. I have status. I have years of loyalty to this airline. You can't seriously tell me that a child takes precedence over me." Jordan's fingers curled around the edge of his sketchbook. He wanted to speak, to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. His heart raced. He looked at his mother. She gave him a small nod, a signal of courage. "This is my seat," Jordan said quietly, almost a whisper, but firm enough to cut through the tension. "My name's on the ticket." The surrounding silence was thick. Diane exhaled sharply, clearly annoyed that the confrontation had not simply ended with Jordan giving in. "Sir," she said to Charles, "please take a moment in the galley while we resolve this." But Charles folded his arms, refusing to budge. "I'm not moving until I get my seat." At that moment, Jordan felt the sting of injustice in a way he never had before. It wasn't just about the cushion beneath him or the extra leg room. It was about the look in Charles's eyes, the quiet message in Diane's voice that his presence here was negotiable, that his dignity was less valuable than a man's frequent flyer miles. Angela leaned down to Jordan, her voice gentle but steady. "Do you want to call your dad?" Jordan hesitated. He thought of Caleb, somewhere in New York, probably already in a meeting with investors or engineers. He didn't want to disturb him, but the pressure in his chest grew unbearable. He nodded. Angela handed him the phone. With trembling hands, Jordan typed a message. "Dad, they're trying to move me from my seat. Please help." He pressed send, His throat felt tight. Meanwhile, Diane's voice sharpened. "Young man," she said, "you need to understand this isn't personal. Sometimes adjustments are necessary." But Jordan caught the flicker in her eyes, the way she avoided looking at him directly. He knew what she wasn't saying. Charles leaned closer, his voice dripping with irritation. "Son, it's best if you just move. Let adults handle adult matters." That was the breaking point. Jordan's chin lifted slightly, his voice trembling but louder than before. "I'm not moving." Gasps rippled through the rows. Someone muttered, "Good for him." Another whispered, "This is unbelievable." The tension spread like fire. Passengers shifted in their seats, some clearly uncomfortable, others visibly supportive. The line between right and wrong was drawing itself in the cabin. And Jordan, 12 years old with a sketchbook in his lap, stood at its center. The phone in his hand buzzed. A message from Caleb flashed across the screen. "Don't move. I'm calling now." Jordan exhaled shakily. His father's words steadied him like a hand on his shoulder from miles away. He tightened his grip on the phone, ready for whatever would come next. The intercom crackled. "Cabin crew, please prepare doors for departure." But the doors would not close, not yet, because what had started as a simple dispute over a seat was about to unravel into something much bigger, a test of power, prejudice, and principle that no one on Flight 604 would forget. The phone buzzed again in Jordan's hand, and this time it wasn't just a message. His father's name lit up the screen, and the vibration felt like a lifeline. With nervous fingers, Jordan tapped to answer, pressing the phone to his ear. "Dad," his voice cracked, raw with tension. "Put me on speaker, son," came Caleb's steady, commanding tone. "Let me talk to them." Jordan's hand shook as he switched to speaker. He held the phone out toward Diane, the supervisor. She hesitated, eyes narrowing, then reluctantly took the device. "This is Diane Keller, cabin supervisor. Who am I speaking with?" The pause that followed was long enough to make Charles smirk, as though expecting the voice on the other end to falter. But when Caleb spoke again, the air itself seemed to shift. "This is Caleb Miles, CEO of Aerogrid Systems," he said evenly. "My son has a confirmed boarding pass for seat 2A. If anyone attempts to move him, you will not only answer to me but to Delta's executive leadership. I have worked with them on infrastructure for nearly a decade. I suggest you choose your words very carefully." Diane's face drained of color. She glanced at Candace, the younger attendant by her side, then back at Jordan. "Mr. Miles," she stammered, "we're only trying to accommodate a loyal Platinum Elite passenger. There's been some confusion." "Confusion?" Caleb's voice cut like glass. "The only confusion is why your crew is considering removing a child with a legitimate ticket in order to satisfy the ego of an entitled man. Put me on with the captain or with corporate. Now." The cabin had gone still. Passengers leaned forward, listening. Even those who had tried to ignore the conflict earlier couldn't help but watch. Charles shifted uneasily, though he masked it with a scoff. "Look," Charles muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Status matters. You don't just buy your way into first class. You earn it. That boy he jabbed a finger toward Jordan doesn't even understand what it means to be here." Angela's voice finally rose, low and sharp. "What it means, sir, is that my son deserves the dignity of sitting where his family paid for him to sit. Nothing more, nothing less." Jordan felt his chest ache. He wanted to shrink from the spotlight, but at the same time, something inside him stiffened. His father's voice, calm yet unyielding, steadied him. "I'm staying," Jordan said, his voice trembling but audible. "I'm not giving up my seat." For a moment, Diane looked like she might argue again, but then another voice joined, deeper and stronger, the captain himself, emerging from the cockpit door. His nameplate read Captain Robert Hayes, and his presence seemed to command respect the way gravity commands weight. "What's going on here?" Captain Hayes asked, his gaze sweeping the cabin. Diane started to explain, but Caleb's voice, still on speaker, interrupted. "Captain Hayes, this is Caleb Miles. My son is in seat 2A. He has a ticket. He has every right to sit there. If this issue isn't resolved immediately, I will ensure that Delta's leadership is on this call within the hour." The captain studied the boy, then his mother, then Charles Whitman, whose face was red with indignation. Slowly, the captain nodded. "The boy keeps his seat," he said firmly. "We're not removing a paying passenger, and certainly not a child. Mr. Whitman, you'll take your assigned seat, or you'll deplane. Those are your options." The words hung in the air like thunder. A few passengers clapped softly, and the sound spread a ripple of approval that grew louder until even Jordan looked around in wonder. Charles's jaw worked furiously, but the weight of eyes on him seemed to press him back. He turned on his heel, muttering curses under his breath, and stomped toward row 4. Jordan exhaled so sharply it felt like the breath had been locked in his chest for hours. His shoulders sagged, but Angela's hand found his, squeezing gently. The captain turned to Diane. "Handle the rest of pre-flight calmly. Please, we've wasted enough time." Then, to Jordan. He offered a brief nod. "You're fine where you are. Son, enjoy the flight." As the captain returned to the cockpit, Caleb's voice spoke once more from the phone. "Jordan, are you okay?" Jordan lifted the device back to his ear, his voice cracking. "Yeah, Dad, I'm okay." "You were brave," Caleb said softly, the steel in his tone replaced by warmth. "I'm proud of you. I'll handle the rest. Just sit tight." Jordan swallowed, fighting tears. "Okay, Dad." The call ended, but the words lingered like a shield around him. The rest of the boarding process went on, though the atmosphere was no longer the same. Passengers whispered, some shooting sympathetic glances toward Jordan, others shaking their heads at the absurdity of the scene. When the doors finally closed and the plane pushed back from the gate, Jordan leaned his forehead against the cool window. The runway lights flickered past in blurred streaks. His heart was still racing, but beneath it was a quiet sense of triumph. As the plane lifted into the sky, Jordan clutched his sketchbook again. His pencil traced shaky lines across the page, forming the outline of wings slicing through clouds. He had kept his seat, but in the quiet corners of his mind, he wondered how many others hadn't been able to. The thought weighed on him as the engines roared, carrying him into a night that would change not just his journey, but the future of everyone who had witnessed it. The plane leveled off, and the seatbelt sign dinged. A hush settled over the first-class cabin, but beneath that hush pulsed the electric current of what had just happened. Jordan sat upright, sketchbook on his lap, but his pencil had stopped moving. He could feel the weight of eyes on him, curious, sympathetic, judgmental. He didn't dare look back, afraid of what he might see. Angela kept a steady hand on his arm. Her voice was low and soothing. "Breathe, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong." He nodded, but his chest still felt tight. He had stood his ground, but the hostility in Charles's voice, the sharp edge in Diane's tone, they lingered like bruises no one could see. A flight attendant returned, this time a younger man with kind eyes. His badge read Evan Porter. He bent slightly toward Jordan and Angela. "Would you like some water or maybe a blanket?" Jordan blinked, surprised by the gentleness. "Water, please." Evan handed him a glass with a quiet smile. "You're safe here," he whispered, then moved down the aisle to tend to other passengers. But the calm didn't last. Charles Whitman, still fuming in row 4, leaned forward, his voice pitched deliberately loud. "Unbelievable. All these years of loyalty, all the money I've given this airline, and they treat me like this, replaced by a child. What kind of world is this Diane, standing nearby, didn't hush him? In fact," she offered a sympathetic nod, "I understand your frustration. Mr. Whitman, I'll file a report after the flight. This isn't over." The words slithered down the aisle, finding Jordan's ears. His stomach dropped. He gripped his sketchbook tighter, as though it could shield him from the contempt laced in their voices. Angela's jaw tightened. She leaned toward her son. "Ignore him. He wants a reaction. Don't give it." But Charles wasn't finished. He spoke louder, addressing the cabin as though campaigning for support. "First class used to mean something. Now they'll sell a premium seat to anyone with a credit card. No standards, no respect for loyalty, no respect for people who actually deserve it." A woman across the aisle shifted uncomfortably. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was steady, her posture graceful. "I saw his ticket," she said, her tone cutting through the air like a bell. "That boy deserves to be here every bit as much as you." Heads turned. The woman was in her 50s, with silver hair pulled neatly into a bun. Her name was Helen Carter, and she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had long ago stopped caring what others thought of her. Charles scoffed. "And who are you?" "Exactly, someone who still believes dignity isn't determined by frequent flyer miles," Helen replied coolly, "or by skin color." The cabin went silent. Even Diane's practiced composure cracked. She shot Helen a warning look, but Helen only crossed her arms and leaned back in her seat, unbothered. Jordan felt a warmth spread in his chest. For the first time since the confrontation began, he wasn't alone. Charles muttered something under his breath and turned away, but the ripple Helen had created was already spreading. A man 2 rows back murmured, "She's right." Another whispered, "The kid has the ticket, doesn't he?" The quiet murmurs became a low hum of disapproval directed not at Jordan, but at Charles and the crew who had sided with him. Diane retreated toward the galley, flustered. Evan reappeared, kneeling briefly by Jordan's seat. "Don't worry," he said softly. "Not everyone agrees with them. You belong here." The words, simple as they were, loosened the knot in Jordan's chest. He gave a small nod, clutching his water glass like a lifeline. Still, the battle wasn't over. Charles's arrogance wasn't so easily silenced. He stood abruptly, ignoring the seatbelt sign as it blinked on for light turbulence. He marched down the aisle, stopping at Diane's side. "This is unacceptable," he hissed. "You know as well as I do, this seat assignment is wrong. That boy shouldn't be here. I want this documented. I want compensation, and I want him moved before we land." Diane, caught between procedure and prejudice, nodded stiffly. "I'll escalate it. Mr. Whitman, please sit down for now." Passengers stared. One muttered, "Sit down, man." Another whispered, "This is ridiculous." Jordan's pulse quickened. He leaned into his mother. "They're not going to make me move, are they?" Angela looked him in the eye. "No, baby, not a chance." But in her own chest, her heart pounded. She knew how quickly situations like this could twist. The turbulence subsided, but the cabin was restless. Every eye seemed to flick between Jordan and Charles, waiting for the next clash. It came sooner than expected. A chime signaled the seatbelt sign turning off again, and Diane reappeared, her expression stiff. She bent toward Angela. "Ma'am, could I have a quick word with you in the galley?" Angela's brow furrowed. "If it's about my son's seat, the answer is no. He's staying right here. Please." Diane pressed, her voice taut. "Just a word." Angela hesitated, then shook her head. "No. If you need to speak with me, you can do it right here." The firmness in her voice was unshakable. Diane straightened, lips pressed tight. Charles, emboldened by Diane's effort, sneered. "You see, they know this isn't right. It's only a matter of time before they fix it." Jordan's chest burned. He wanted to shout, to tell Charles to stop, but the fear tangled his words. Instead, he heard his father's voice echo in memory. "Your dignity is yours to keep." He lifted his chin, meeting Charles's glare. "I'm not moving. Not now. Not when we land. Not ever." The declaration startled even him. His voice was steadier than he felt, but the effect was immediate. A smattering of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger. Helen clapped firmly, nodding at Jordan with approval. Charles froze, the sound of clapping hitting him like a slap. His cheeks flushed scarlet. He turned back to his seat, furious, but the damage was done. The boy had spoken, and the cabin had chosen a side. For the rest of the flight, the tension simmered like a storm cloud. Charles whispered to Diane, plotting his report. Diane scribbled notes on a pad, her frustration palpable. But Jordan sat quietly in his seat, Angela's hand over his, Evan checking in with a reassuring smile, and Helen casting him glances of encouragement. It was not peace, but it was survival, and in survival there was a quiet kind of victory. The hum of the engines filled the silence after the clapping faded, but the atmosphere remained taut, like a string pulled too tight. Jordan leaned back against his seat, heart still hammering from his own defiance. He had spoken up, and for the first time since the confrontation began, he felt the cabin tilt in his favor. Yet there was no comfort in Charles Whitman's glare 2 rows back, or in Diane Keller's sharp, scribbled notes. The storm wasn't over. Angela reached for the phone resting on the tray. She pressed it gently into Jordan's palm. "Your father said he'd handle it," she whispered. "If anything happens, don't be afraid to answer right away." Jordan nodded, clutching the phone like it was a lifeline. He wasn't sure what his dad could do from hundreds of miles away, but he knew one thing: Caleb Miles was not a man who made idle promises. As if on cue, the device buzzed again. This time it wasn't a text, it was a call, and Jordan's eyes widened at the name flashing across the screen. "Dad, Caleb Miles." "Speaker," Angela urged softly. Jordan tapped the green icon and held the phone between them. His father's voice came through calm, but layered with an unmistakable steel. "Angela, Jordan, I just finished a call with Delta's executive team. They're aware of the incident. The decision has been made. Jordan stays in his seat. If anyone attempts otherwise, They'll be suspended before the plane even lands." Jordan blinked, hardly believing the words. Angela's lips curved in a small smile, relief washing over her features. But Caleb wasn't finished. His voice sharpened, carrying like a blade across the airwaves. "Now, I need to speak to the supervisor again. Put me on with Diane Keller." Angela angled the phone toward Diane, who froze mid-step. Every passenger within earshot watched as the color drained from her face. Reluctantly, she leaned down. "This is Diane." Caleb's tone dropped lower, controlled, deliberate. "Miss Keller, this is not just a father speaking. This is the CEO of the company that manages the very systems you rely on to keep this aircraft in the air. My son will not be humiliated by you or anyone under your authority. Do I make myself clear?" Diane swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." "Good," Caleb continued. "I also want a record of every word Mr. Whitman has said to my son. That video footage you're also aware of, it's already circulating. Delta's legal counsel is preparing to review your handling of this matter. Choose your actions wisely." The line went quiet, but the silence was heavier than any turbulence. Diane handed the phone back without another word, her hands trembling slightly. Charles, who had been leaning forward to catch every word, scoffed loudly. "Are we really letting some corporate big shot run this flight? What happened to order? What happened to respect for loyalty?" But before Diane could respond, Caleb's voice returned, firm and unyielding. "Mr. Whitman, I assume you can hear me." Charles froze, glancing around as passengers turned in unison. Caleb continued, his words cutting through the cabin as if he were standing right there. "Loyalty isn't built on arrogance. It isn't built on degrading children. It's built on respect for every single passenger, regardless of age or color. If you can't understand that, perhaps your loyalty has always been to your own entitlement, not this airline." The reaction was immediate. A ripple of murmurs swept the cabin. Someone clapped once, then again, and soon the sound spread. Even those who had stayed silent before now joined, the applause growing stronger until it filled the space like a wave. Charles's face turned crimson. He slumped back into his seat, his jaw tight, eyes darting around as though searching for escape. Jordan sat frozen, stunned by the power of his father's words. His chest swelled with a mixture of pride and disbelief. He glanced at Angela, who smiled softly, brushing her hand through his curls. "See," she whispered, "you're not alone in this." The applause eventually quieted, but the tension remained. Jordan reached for his sketchbook again, trying to steady his hand, but his mind replayed the words over and over. Loyalty isn't built on arrogance. It's built on respect. The plane cruised steadily, but in the cabin, everyone remained alert, aware they had witnessed something rare, an invisible line being drawn and crossed. Justice delivered not in a courtroom but in real time, 30,000 feet in the air. And yet, as Jordan sketched the outline of the wingtip against the endless blue outside, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The battle wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about something much larger, something that would follow them far beyond this flight. The hours stretched, though for Jordan it felt like time was suspended somewhere between dread and anticipation. Every so often he glanced down at his phone, half expecting another vibration, another line from his father. But Caleb's silence now was deliberate. His voice had already filled the cabin once. He had delivered his message. Now it was the airline's turn to reckon with what had been set in motion. Angela dozed lightly beside him, her head tilted against the seat, but Jordan remained wide-eyed, his pencil moving in restless lines across his sketchbook. He drew the wing, then erased it. He drew clouds, then shaded them too dark. His hand wouldn't steady. Each time he thought of Charles's glare, his stomach tightened all over again. When the captain's voice finally came over the intercom, Jordan felt the jolt of reality return. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into New York. Please fasten your seat belts and prepare for landing." A murmur rippled through the cabin, louder than usual. The passengers weren't just preparing for landing, they were preparing for the aftermath. Everyone knew the story wasn't ending quietly on the tarmac. Angela stirred awake, stretching her fingers before placing one firmly over her son's hand. "Almost there," she whispered. Her smile was calm, but Jordan could see the tension in her jawline. She was bracing herself. Charles sat stiffly 2 rows back, his phone in hand, tapping furiously at emails or perhaps complaints. Every so often he muttered, as though rehearsing a speech for whoever was waiting on the ground. Diane, too, seemed restless. She made unnecessary trips up and down the aisle, checking seat belts that were already buckled, fussing with storage bins, her nerves betraying her calm mask. Evan trailed her once, gently redirecting her with a quiet word. Jordan caught Evan's glance, and the subtle shake of his head it said, "Hold steady. Don't be afraid." The plane dipped lower, the skyline of New York rising in the distance. Jordan pressed his face to the window. His reflection layered over the towers, the rivers, the veins of highways lit like circuits. For a moment, he thought of his father standing in an office somewhere downtown, watching this very plane approach, ready for what would come. The landing gear thudded into place. The plane shuddered, wheels screeching against the runway before slowing, the weight of arrival pressing everyone back into their seats. But it wasn't relief that filled the cabin. It was tension, wound tighter now that the engines roared toward the gate. When the plane finally stopped and the ding signaled release from seat belts, no one leapt up as usual. Instead, heads craned toward the front, where 2 men in suits and airport security officers stood waiting just beyond the jet bridge. Their presence was impossible to ignore. Angela stiffened. Jordan's chest constricted. He clutched his sketchbook close, as though it might shield him. The captain's voice came once more, but this time not from the intercom. Captain Robert Hayes had stepped out of the cockpit, his hat tucked beneath his arm. His voice carried calm authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain seated until instructed. We have airline representatives here to address a situation from earlier in the flight." Charles smirked, already rising from his seat. "Finally," he muttered, "they'll sort this out." But the eyes of the suited men didn't fall on Jordan. They didn't fall on Angela. They fell on Diane. "Ms. Keller," one of them said firmly, "would you please come with us?" The cabin went utterly still. Diane blinked, then forced a smile that faltered almost instantly. I don't understand." "Surely you mean—" Her eyes darted toward Jordan. "No, ma'am." The man interrupted. "We've been briefed. We'll need to speak with you immediately. Your conduct during this flight will be reviewed pending further action." Gasps scattered through the rows. Evan froze in place, then straightened, his expression caught between shock and relief. Charles surged forward. Wait a second, what about me? I'm the one who's been wronged here. The second representative, younger but no less stern, fixed him with a look. Mr. Whitman, your behavior has also been noted. Security will escort you for questioning as well. Your Platinum Elite status is under review. The smirk melted from Charles's face. You can't be serious. Do you have any idea who I am? But the murmurs of passengers drowned him out. Phones lifted quietly, cameras already recording. Someone whispered, "Good riddance." Jordan sat frozen, unable to process it all. He had spent hours bracing for the possibility that he would be dragged off, humiliated further. Instead, the very people who had tried to strip him of his seat were being led away. Angela exhaled slowly, squeezing his hand. See, baby, the truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just arrives. As Diane and Charles were escorted off the plane, heads bowed, a ripple of applause swelled again. Not as explosive as before, but deeper, more certain. It wasn't just for Jordan this time. It was for the principle everyone had witnessed unfold a child's dignity being defended in full view of the world. The captain approached Jordan then, his voice gentler now. You did well, son. You held your ground. Jordan managed a small nod, his throat tight with emotion. He wanted to say something, but the words tangled. All he could do was clutch his sketchbook and whisper to himself, I belong. Angela kissed the top of his head. Around them, passengers gathered their belongings, but the air still vibrated with what had happened. This was no ordinary flight. This was a story that would not end when the wheels touched down. The jet bridge was crowded with anticipation. Passengers filed out, their conversations hushed but urgent, phones still in hand, some uploading videos already making their way across the internet. The ripple of what had happened on Flight 604 was no longer confined to the cabin. It had escaped, spreading into the world outside. Jordan walked beside his mother, clutching his sketchbook against his chest. His legs felt heavy, but his chin was lifted just enough to keep him from folding inward. Angela's hand never left his shoulder, steadying him as they stepped into the terminal. Two representatives in dark suits were waiting. One was Robert Evans, a senior airline director whose expression was a careful balance of authority and apology. The other, younger but no less poised, introduced himself as Matthew Hughes, a corporate liaison. They stepped forward with urgency, but their focus was not on Charles Whitman or Diane Keller, both of whom had already been led away under escort. It was on Jordan and Angela, Mrs. Miles. Jordan, Evans began, his voice firm but warm. I want to extend a personal apology on behalf of the airline. What you endured today is unacceptable. You will not be treated as an afterthought. You will not be silenced. We are here to make that clear. Angela studied him with cautious eyes, her hand tightening slightly on her son. Words are easy. Mr. Evans, my boy sat in that seat for hours under suspicion, while grown adults questioned his right to exist there. How will you ensure this never happens again? The director held her gaze without wavering. We have already begun an internal review. Ms. Keller and Mr. Whitman are being interviewed as we speak. Their conduct will not be overlooked. What happened on this flight is bigger than a seat assignment. It's about the culture we allow in our company. That culture is changing starting tonight. Matthew Hughes stepped forward, his voice calmer, deliberate. Mrs. Miles, we know who your husband is, And even if we didn't, this would be handled with full seriousness. Mr. Caleb Miles has already spoken to our executive board. A public statement is being drafted, but more importantly, a reform plan will follow. This incident will not disappear into silence. Jordan blinked, overwhelmed by the gravity of the words. Just hours earlier, he had been a boy trembling in a leather seat, unsure if anyone would defend him. Now, corporate directors stood before him, apologizing. The weight of it made his chest ache in a new way. Angela softened slightly, though her voice held steel. He doesn't need a corporate statement. He needs to know he belongs anywhere his ticket says he belongs. Can you guarantee him that Evans nodded? Yes, and we'll prove it by action, not words. Before anything else could be said, a murmur rose from the nearby crowd. Reporters had gathered, tipped off by passengers posting on social media. Camera flashes lit the air, microphones extended, voices calling Jordan's name. Jordan. How did it feel to be asked to move, Mrs. Miles? Will your family be pressing charges? Is Caleb Miles taking legal action against the airline? Jordan froze, the crowd pressing in like a wave. His sketchbook nearly slipped from his grip, his pulse racing. Angela pulled him closer, her body instinctively forming a shield. Evans raised his hands, motioning security to form a barrier. Give them space. This boy is not a spectacle. His voice carried over the noise, but the cameras still rolled. It was then that a familiar voice broke through the chaos. Jordan turned, and there was his father. Caleb Miles strode through the terminal, his tall frame cutting through the crowd like a blade. His suit was crisp, but his eyes burned not with corporate detachment but with the fire of a father who had been waiting, powerless, until this moment. Jordan dropped the sketchbook and ran. Caleb caught him in a fierce embrace, lifting him off the ground as though to anchor him back into safety. For the first time since boarding, Jordan let the tears fall freely. You held your dignity, Caleb whispered into his hair. You did exactly what I taught you, and I could not be prouder. Angela reached them, her own tears brimming, though her face held the quiet pride of a woman who had endured enough to know the value of this victory. Caleb drew her into the embrace, their family circle closing against the world outside. Reporters shouted questions, flashes blinding, but for that moment, none of it mattered. When Caleb finally set Jordan down, he turned to Evans and Hughes. You have a choice, he said, his voice calm but edged with finality. This doesn't end with apologies. It doesn't end with suspensions. If you want to prove your airline values every passenger equally, you will commit today to systemic reform, training, oversight, accountability. If not, then understand this Aerogrid Systems controls the infrastructure your operations depend on. I will not hesitate to use that leverage to bring you down. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They carried the quiet weight of absolute conviction. Evans nodded gravely. We hear you, and we agree. Tonight, we begin drafting what we will call the Clear Sky Protocol, an independent system to escalate any discrimination complaint. Transparent to both the public and our staff, every gate, every flight attendant, every supervisor will undergo mandatory training, and passengers will know their rights are protected, Matthew Hughes added. And Jordan will be the first name entered into that protocol as the reason it exists. A hush fell even among the reporters. The idea of a boy's name tied forever to reform made the moment feel larger than any headline. Jordan looked up at his father, confusion and awe mingling in his eyes. Dad, all this. Because I didn't move, Caleb knelt, meeting his son's gaze at eye level. Because you didn't give away your dignity. That's worth more than any seat. Jordan. It's the reason the world will change. By the time the Miles family made it to their car, the story had already leapt from the terminal into living rooms across America. Clips recorded by passengers on Flight 604 were spreading like wildfire across social media. Hashtags trended: WAMA Seat 2A, WAM Flying, While Black, Respect All Passengers. The video of Caleb's voice booming over speakerphone, measured, calm, but filled with steel, was replayed again and again, paired with Jordan's determined little voice saying, "This is my seat. I'm not leaving." Angela tried to shield her son from the noise, tucking him into the back seat of the family's SUV as Caleb slid in beside him. Yet, Jordan could see flashes from phones outside, reporters running to capture a last image before the tinted windows shut the world out. Inside the quiet hum of the car, Jordan whispered, "Dad, why are so many people watching me? I didn't do anything special." Caleb turned, his hand steady on his son's shoulder. "You did, son. You stood your ground when it mattered. That's not small. Most grown men can't do what you did today." Angela leaned in, her voice softer but resolute. "Jordan, you showed the world what dignity looks like in a child, and that's why people care." As the SUV pulled onto the freeway, Caleb's phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from journalists, activists, even fellow CEOs. One message from an old friend simply read, "This could change everything." By nightfall, major news outlets were airing segments. CNN replayed the footage with analysts debating corporate accountability. Local stations interviewed passengers who had stood up for Jordan. Even late-night talk show hosts cracked solemn jokes, their audiences cheering when the punchline landed on the arrogance of a platinum elite who couldn't handle losing to a 12-year-old. But beneath the noise, something deeper began to stir. Messages poured in from ordinary people, single mothers who had been forced to give up seats for executives, students humiliated by attendance, travelers of color sharing stories of bias at gates and in cabins. Thousands of comments under trending videos echoed the same thought. This happened to me, too. The next morning, Caleb sat at the breakfast table with coffee cooling at his elbow. His laptop glowed with emails from AeroGrid's board, Delta's executives, and civil rights organizations eager to seize the momentum. Angela, hair pulled back, set a plate of eggs on the table, but her gaze stayed fixed on the tablet streaming live coverage. Jordan, still groggy, shuffled into the room, sketchbook under his arm. "Mornin'," he mumbled, sliding into a chair. Angela kissed the top of his head. "Mornin', sweetheart. Sleep okay?" Jordan shrugged. "Kinda. I kept hearing people clapping in my dreams." Caleb chuckled softly, though his eyes remained serious. "That applause wasn't just for you, Jordan. It was for every person who's ever been told they don't belong where they've rightfully earned the right to be." Jordan looked down, fiddling with his pencil. "But what if people hate me? Now I saw some comments. They said I only got to keep my seat because of you. Dad." Caleb's chest tightened. He leaned forward, catching his son's eyes. "Listen to me carefully. You had every right to that seat. You didn't ask for my help. You held your ground first. I stepped in because that's what fathers do. Never let anyone tell you your dignity is borrowed. It's yours." Jordan nodded slowly, the words sinking in. Later that day, the Miles family appeared at a small press conference, not at Caleb's office, but at a community center where Angela often volunteered. Caleb had insisted the location matter. It wasn't about corporate power. It was about people. Reporters packed the hall, cameras aimed at the podium. Evans and Hughes, the airline officials, stood off to the side, visibly humbled. Caleb spoke first, his voice clear but not theatrical. My son was nearly forced from a seat his family paid for, not because of a mistake in paperwork, not because of an emergency, but because someone with privilege demanded it, and employees chose to serve arrogance instead of fairness. That's not just about my family. That's about every family who has ever been told, in words or in silence, that they don't belong. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. Angela followed, her tone softer but piercing. This is not about vengeance. It's about dignity. My son is 12. He should not have to fight for his right to sit in a seat his father purchased. If it can happen to him, it can happen to anyone. Finally, at Caleb's urging, Jordan stepped up to the microphone. His voice trembled at first, but the hush of the room steadied him. I just wanted to watch cartoons on the plane. I just wanted to sit where my ticket said, but they told me I had to move. I didn't move because my dad told me once. Your dignity isn't for sale. The crowd erupted into applause. Angela's eyes glistened. Caleb's jaw tightened with pride. That night, the clip of Jordan speaking small voice but heavy words went viral. It was replayed on every platform, captioned, "Your dignity isn't for sale." The phrase became a rallying cry. Hashtags multiplied. Dignity not for sale. Jordan Miles, seat 2A. Within days, Delta announced sweeping reforms. The Clear Sky Protocol Caleb had demanded was officially adopted. Independent hotlines, third-party oversight, mandatory training. Other airlines, under pressure, followed suit, each scrambling to show they were not behind the tide of change. But the ripple didn't stop at aviation. Corporations across industries began re-examining their policies. Think pieces appeared in major papers about systemic bias, entitlement, and the courage of one boy to say no. Universities requested Caleb to speak. Activists invited Angela to panels. And Jordan. He just wanted to go back to drawing airplanes. One evening, a week after the flight, Jordan sat cross-legged on the living room rug, sketching a plane soaring above clouds, but this time he added something new. Tiny figures in the windows, all different shapes, colors, and ages, sitting side by side. He held it up shyly when Caleb passed. Do you think this is possible? Dad, everyone flying together, no fights about who belongs. Caleb crouched, studying the drawing. His voice was gentle. It's not just possible. You just helped make it real. The weeks that followed felt like living under a magnifying glass. For the Miles family, life was no longer private. News vans sometimes idled outside their home. Reporters waited at the edges of Jordan's school, and microphones appeared wherever Caleb went. Though their faces had become familiar to millions, the scrutiny carried a heavy weight. It wasn't just praise that filled the air. Alongside the flood of support, a storm of backlash swirled. Certain commentators accused Caleb of exploiting his position, claiming Jordan had only kept his seat because of corporate muscle. Others framed the story as a minor misunderstanding, blown out of proportion by social media. Jordan, scrolling once too often on his tablet, stumbled into those comments, and each one felt like a stone dropped into his stomach. One night, as Angela tucked him in. He whispered, "Mom, what if they're right? What if I only got to stay because Dad's powerful Angela smoothed his hair, her voice steady? You stayed because you believed you had the right. That came from you, not from anyone else. Don't let strangers take that truth away." But the outside pressure was not the only storm brewing. Charles Whitman, stripped of his platinum elite status and fired from his consulting firm after the video of his tirade went viral, refused to go quietly. 2 weeks after the flight, his lawyers filed a defamation suit against both Delta and the Miles family, claiming his reputation had been irreparably destroyed by a media circus built on exaggeration. The news broke over breakfast. Caleb unfolded the paper with steady hands, though his jaw tightened as he read the headline, "Whitman Sues Airline. Family After Viral Flight Clash." Angela set down her coffee with a clatter. "He has the nerve to call us the problem. Jordan's fork froze midair. He's suing us." But I didn't lie. His voice cracked, panic rising in his throat. Caleb pushed the paper aside and leaned forward, his tone calm but ironclad. "Listen to me. Truth doesn't fear courtroom. He can file all the suits he wants, but the evidence is clear. We didn't humiliate him. His actions did that. And I will not let him drag you into fear. Son." Jordan nodded slowly, though fear still lingered in his eyes. Within days, the courtroom became a new battleground. Cameras clustered outside the courthouse. Commentators speculated endlessly, and lawyers sharpened arguments. For Jordan, stepping into that building was terrifying. He clutched his sketchbook tighter than ever, drawing airplanes and skylines on the margins of his notebook while lawyers debated his family's dignity. Inside, the contrast between the parties was stark. Charles Whitman entered flanked by attorneys in polished suits, his expression sour but defiant. Diane Keller, also under review by the airline, appeared as a witness for his side, her uniform long gone, her demeanor brittle. On the other side, Caleb stood tall, Angela by his side, Jordan between them, their attorney, a calm but formidable black woman named Renee Marshall, carried their case with both precision and passion. "Ladies and gentlemen," Renee began, her voice clear as a bell, "this case is not about defamation. It is about accountability. Mr. Whitman wishes to rewrite the story of Flight 604, but the truth is preserved in the phones of dozens of passengers, in the eyes of a boy who refused to surrender his dignity, and in the voices of witnesses who stood for fairness. One by one, those witnesses took the stand. Helen Carter, the passenger who had spoken up on the plane, described the moment Jordan was pressured. Her voice trembled with emotion as she recalled his quiet words. "This is my seat." Evan Porter, the young flight attendant, testified reluctantly but honestly, admitting that Diane had sided with Whitman without cause. His honesty carried weight, his youth underscoring how culture within the airline had failed him, too. When it came time for Jordan himself to speak, the courtroom stilled. He shifted nervously in the witness chair, feet barely reaching the ground. Renee crouched slightly so her eyes met his. "Jordan," she asked gently, "can you tell the court why you didn't move when you were asked?" He swallowed hard, glancing at his parents before answering. "Because my ticket said that was my seat, and because my dad told me once, if you know you belong, don't let anyone tell you different." I was scared, but I didn't want to feel small. The courtroom was silent for a beat, then filled with the scratching of pens, the clicking of keys, the weight of his words rippling outward. Charles's attorney tried to twist the moment. But Jordan, didn't your father's power influence the outcome? Jordan frowned, his voice firmer than anyone expected. My dad wasn't on that plane. I was. I stayed because I knew I should. He just reminded everyone I wasn't alone. The line struck like a hammer. Even some jurors leaned back, nodding unconsciously. Outside, the trial became the new center of the nation's attention. Protesters and supporters gathered on courthouse steps, holding signs that read, "Dignity has no status level, and we are all Jordan." Hashtags surged again. The lawsuit, intended to silence, only amplified the story further. At home, the family wrestled with exhaustion. Angela worried for Jordan's emotional weight, urging Caleb to shield him more. Caleb, though, believed in facing the storm together. Late at night, he sat with Jordan at the kitchen table, flipping through the boys' sketches. One page showed a courtroom, tiny figures drawn in the windows like passengers on a plane. "You're carrying a lot," Caleb murmured. Jordan nodded. "I don't want people fighting because of me." Caleb rested a hand on his shoulder. "They're not fighting because of you. They're fighting because of what you stood for. That's different." The trial dragged for weeks, but momentum swung steadily. Witness after witness dismantled Whitman's claims. Videos replayed again and again. And slowly, the public began to see the lawsuit for what it was. A last gasp of entitlement refusing to accept accountability. Finally, on a crisp autumn afternoon, the judge delivered the ruling. Whitman's defamation claims were dismissed with prejudice. The court affirmed that the evidence overwhelmingly supported the Miles family's account, and that public reaction was the natural consequence of his own conduct. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as Caleb addressed the crowd. Jordan stood beside him, Angela's hand on his shoulder. "Today is not just a victory for my family," Caleb declared. "It's a victory for every person who has ever been told they do not belong. The courtroom has spoken, but more importantly, the people have spoken. Dignity is not a privilege, it is a right." Cheers erupted. Jordan, overwhelmed, buried his face in his mother's side, though a shy smile tugged at his lips. And somewhere in the crowd, unseen but felt, the tide shifted again. This was no longer just a family story. It was a movement. Autumn deepened into winter, and though the frenzy of cameras had subsided, its echo still lingered. For the Miles family, life was slowly returning to rhythms that felt familiar. Angela reminding Jordan to finish his homework before cartoons. Caleb juggling late-night meetings, the quiet comfort of Sunday dinners together. Yet nothing was exactly as it had been. Their names had been carried across headlines, etched into hashtags, bound to a story larger than themselves. Jordan, especially, carried that weight. In the hallways of his school, classmates whispered his name, some with admiration, others with envy. Teachers spoke of him with unusual softness, and strangers, people he'd never met, sent letters, drawings, even handmade model airplanes, thanking him for standing tall. One evening, as snow drifted gently outside their New York home, Jordan sat cross-legged on the living room rug, building a model jet from a kit sent by a boy in Chicago. He moved with unusual care, smoothing decals, aligning wings, lost in the concentration of creation. Caleb lowered himself onto the rug beside him. Tie loosened, fatigue etched into his face. "You've been quiet today," Caleb observed. Jordan shrugged, not looking up. "Everyone keeps saying I'm brave. But I was just scared. I didn't move because I didn't wanna. That doesn't feel like bravery. It just feels normal." Caleb smiled faintly, watching the boy's careful fingers. "Bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about standing in the truth even when your knees shake. That's what you did. And sometimes, son, what feels normal to you is extraordinary to the world." Jordan paused, then whispered, "Do you think people will forget? Or will I always just be the boy on the plane?" The question pierced Caleb more than he expected. He leaned in, voice firm yet gentle. "You'll always be Jordan, and what you did will be part of your story, but not the whole of it. You'll write the rest in your own way." Angela, listening from the kitchen doorway, felt tears gather unbidden. She carried 2 mugs of hot cocoa into the room, setting them down with a soft clink. "You know," she said with a wry smile, "I'd settle for him just remembering to put his socks in the hamper." Jordan laughed, and the heaviness in the room lifted. In the weeks that followed, the airline reforms Caleb demanded took root. The Clear Sky Protocol became more than a promise, it became practice. Passengers reported incidents, knowing their complaints wouldn't vanish into silence. Attendants underwent immersive training that forced them to confront bias, not just through lectures but through lived simulations. Gates across the country displayed new signage. Every passenger, every seat, equal dignity. One morning, Robert Evans invited the Miles family to the airline's headquarters. In a modest ceremony, Jordan's name was inscribed on a plaque commemorating the birth of the Clear Sky Protocol. He shifted uncomfortably under the attention, whispering to Angela, "It feels weird seeing my name on a wall." She squeezed his hand. "Sometimes the world needs reminders of what matters most. Today, that reminder is you." As cameras flashed, Jordan looked at the plaque again. Beneath his name, etched in brass, were words he had once said without thinking they would echo. "Your dignity isn't for sale." The phrase traveled farther than any of them could have predicted. It appeared on protest banners, was quoted in university lectures, painted on murals in airports from Atlanta to Los Angeles. But for the Miles family, the true meaning of it revealed itself in smaller, quieter moments, like when a young flight attendant approached Angela months later during a trip and whispered, "Because of you, I found my courage to speak up." Or when a father clasped Caleb's hand in a restaurant and said, "Your son gave mine a voice he didn't know he had." Through it all, Jordan tried to remain just a boy. He played basketball with friends, stayed up too late on weekends, sketched planes and cities in the margins of his notebooks, but the ordeal had left him changed, too. His drawings grew more intricate, filled with tiny details, diverse passengers in rows, crew members smiling, skies clear of storm. On his 13th birthday, the family gathered in the backyard under strings of lights, laughter mingling with the crisp winter air. Angela brought out a cake, candles flickering. Caleb rested a hand on his son's shoulder as Jordan closed his eyes to make a wish. Later, as the candles smoked and plates clinked, Jordan pulled out a folded paper. His cheeks reddened, but he held it out to his parents. "I wrote something for school, but I want to read it to you first." Angela and Caleb exchanged a glance, then nodded. Jordan cleared his throat, voice wavering at first but growing steadier. "People say I was brave, but I didn't feel brave. I felt small. I felt like I didn't matter to some people. But then I remembered what my parents always told me, that dignity is not something anyone gives you, It's yours already. That's why I stayed. And if the world remembers me, I want them to remember that part, not the fight or the shouting, just that a kid can sit where he belongs. When he finished, silence lingered, broken only by Angela's soft sniffle. Caleb pulled him into an embrace, voice low but thick with emotion. You've already written your legacy, son. As the evening wound down, neighbors and friends gathered their coats, and Jordan slipped away for a moment, standing alone beneath the cold stars. The world still felt huge, uncertain, sometimes frightening. But within him burned a steadiness he hadn't known before. Somewhere, planes traced their paths across the sky, carrying passengers to places unknown. Jordan watched the blinking lights in the distance and whispered to himself, "Everyone belongs up there." And in that quiet moment, the boy who once clutched a sketchbook on Flight 604 no longer felt small. He felt ready for the future, for whatever sky awaited him. At its heart, this story is not about a boy on a plane. It is about the universal human need for dignity. Life often places us in situations where others may test our worth, where prejudice or entitlement may try to strip us of what we deserve. Yet the lesson we can all take is this dignity is not granted by others. It is carried within us, and no one has the right to take it away. For older generations who have lived through decades of change and struggle, this reminder feels especially powerful. Many have been asked, in one form or another, to give up their seat in life, whether in careers, communities, or relationships, and yet choosing to hold your ground with calm and courage can set an example not only for yourself, but for those who come after you. What we pass on is not just material wealth, but values the courage to say no when unfairness demands yes, the strength to protect dignity even when easier roads tempt us. This story reminds us that every stand we take, no matter how small, echoes far beyond the moment, and sometimes it changes the world. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that inspire, heal, and remind us of the power of dignity and justice.